movie The Karate Kid, a movie that spawned 2 sequels, video games, and for the past 5 seasons, smash streaming hit. Still, this beach just no, it's many dollars. Yeah. School is one of those magic places. You're taking me down memory lane, man. This is amazing. If you remember the movie poster, then you know exactly where the Karate Kids, Ralph Macchio, and I met up. And won. What was thinking doing on some sort of there? Oh, great. It is 41-ish years ago. But I remember being dark and cold coming out of that water. This part. Daniel Russo had just moved to Los Angeles, the plot out, when he quickly becomes the target of rival Johnny Wilmot. Daniel learns karate from Mr. Neal.
Welcome to our service from the Unitarian Society of Northampton and Florence. I'm David Mix Barrington, and I'm a member of the worship committee and the choir. If you are new or returning after a time away, we're glad to see you. Please feel free to fill out a blue welcome card, which looks like this, which you can put in your offering plate later in the service. There is a link to an online version in the chat. We'll put you on our email list so you can receive information about all that we do. We strive to be a congregation that welcomes people of all ages, races, religious beliefs, backgrounds, sexual orientations, gender identities, and abilities. We belong to the Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations, and we are guided and inspired by its values and principles. Our values and principles move us to remember that those of us in the Pioneer Valley live on the unceded homeland of the Pocumtuck, Nonotuck, and Western Nipmuc peoples. We acknowledge our responsibility to confront the legacies of dispossession and systemic racism that are part of our collective history, and we affirm and celebrate the many legacies that inspire us. We have drawing materials and other ways to occupy hands on the tables in back. Restrooms are downstairs and reach through one of these two doors. You can either take the stairs or an elevator and return the same way. We're here to celebrate, to reflect, and to support one another. It is good to be together, and now we'll begin our service.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Joanna Brown, and I'm very glad you've joined us this morning for the service. We're now going to light our chalice, and David Mix-Barrington will actually light the candles, and we can remain seated and read along with me the chalice lighting words. We have a legal and moral obligation to protect people fleeing bombs, bullets, and tyrants. And throughout history, those people have enriched our society. And this is a quotation by Juliet Stevenson, who's an actor. We will now stand as you are able and sing our hymn, Old 100th. What we do is we sing the English lines first, straight down, and then we repeat it in Spanish.
Through every
yours, right? Great, thank you. All right, see if this is working? Just.
All right.
Great. Where are we doing here? Thank you. And now it's time to greet one another. If you're on Zoom, you're invited to stay on, to turn on your videos, wave and say hello in the chat. It's helpful to switch to gallery view. Anyone online or here in person who is new or newish and would like to, please say hello and tell us where you're from. Okay. I'm not doing that. All right. Great. I'm done as well. Good job. She's right there. She's right there. Need to be up. I'm talking next. So. Sure. Oops. Except it's timed out again. Can you just? Thank you. Great. Sure. It has been good to see everyone. Please remember to turn off your videos. That's people on cell phones. On the other things, let's do that. All right, great. We're not doing that. So, our generosity makes everything we do possible, and it helps us support organizations and movements in the greater community. Half of the proceeds each week's offering supports the Society's operating budget, and half are shared outside our walls. The organizations we are currently supporting are listed on the screen, on the Zoom screen. It may be, it's not there? No, they're written on the paper. They will say who we're contributing to. Our morning offering will now be given and gratefully received.
I want to just make mention and thank Alice Wanamaker, who did a service on immigration just a few weeks ago here. We each thought of our themes and chose our dates totally independent of each other, and she did a wonderful service, which is now archived on the Unitarian YouTube channel. So if you have the time, I encourage you to listen to hers as well. We really gather in a spirit today of a desire to understand more, to get beyond the headlines of the news, to get beyond kind of short phrases about what's going on, and to hear more personal, firsthand accounts, such as what Alice will give to us. I chose the readings and some of the songs, and I will start out by reading a poem called Home. And Home is by a man named Warsan Shire, S-H-I-R-E, who is a Somali British poet and a refugee. This is a long excerpt from the poem. No one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark. You only run for the border when you see the whole city running as well, your neighbors running faster than you. You have to understand that no one puts their children in a boat unless the water is safer than the land. No one burns their palms under trains beneath carriages. No one spends days and nights in the stomach of a truck, feeding on newspaper, unless the miles traveled means something more than a journey. No one crawls under fences. No one wants to be beaten or pitied. Go home, blacks, refugees, dirty immigrants, asylum seekers, sucking our country dry. I want to go home, but home is the mouth of a shark. Home is the barrel of a gun. And no one would leave home unless home chased you to the shore, unless home told you to quicken your legs, leave your clothes behind, crawl through the desert, wade through the oceans. No one leaves home until home is a sweaty voice in your ear saying, leave. Run away from me now. I don't know what I've become. But I know that anywhere is safer than here. The next song is If I Give Your Name, and Alice would like to preface that with a few comments of her own.
So this is a song by Emma's Revolution, who hopefully many of you know, but it's one of their lesser known songs. They wrote it right after 9/11 in 2001, and it was really important to me at the time and since then, because it says with all the mourning that was happening, grieving that was happening in this country, that there were people who were invisible, and those people are undocumented immigrants. And so this song very much, I get the chills when I listen to it, it very much talks about the real lives of those who are undocumented, who at this point are estimated to be 11 million people. And I will talk a little bit more about that later. The only other thing I wanted to mention is, on the one hand, there's this song that talks about fear and invisibility, and on the other hand, a number of years after that, young people started proclaiming that they were undocumented and unafraid and being out publicly about that.
Mi esposa, my wife, worked on the 80th floor. The company had hired my people before. She got the job by word of mouth. That's the way in the north when you're from the south. They say 3,000, but the counting's not done. Mi esposa está muerta, 3001. I have no papers, I have no rights. All my days and sleepless nights, missing you silently. If I give your name, will they come after me? Mi hermano, my brother, the elevator man, a doctor in our country, but you take what you can. I saw the photos in Union Square, but I could not leave his picture there. They say 3,000, that's not true. Mi hermano no volverá, 3002. I have no papers, I have no rights. All my days and sleepless nights, missing you silently. If I give your name, will they come after me? Mi hija, my daughter, went in early that day. She had always been that way. Her daughter asked, where did she go? How to tell her, I don't know. They say 3,000, but that can't be. Perdí a mi hija, 3003. I have no papers, I have no rights. All my days and sleepless nights, missing you silently. If I give your name, will they come after me? Mi padre, my father, I have no words. I tried to find you when I heard they gave some ashes to families, but I'll only have the ones I breathe. They say 3,000, so many more desaparecidos, 3004. I have no papers, I have no rights. All my days and sleepless nights, missing you silently. If I give your name, I have no papers, I have no rights. All my days and sleepless nights, missing you silently. If I give your name, mi esposa, my wife, will it come after me? Mi hermano, my brother, will it come after me? Mi hija, my daughter, will it come after me? Mi padre, my father, if I give your name, will they come after me?
pleasure to introduce to you Alice Levine. Alice and I were students at Hampshire College in 1972, and we really met at a workshop at Smith College, almost an est kind of a weekend, called Anger as a Positive Force, which seemed to be a very appropriate place to meet her. We've each done activism in our own lives, and we've now known each other 50 years. And when I learned of Alice's visits to the southern border and also to detention, quote, camps in Florida, I said, why don't we do a service together? And this is the culmination of that. I just want to read you the first paragraph of Alice's bio, which is in your order of meeting. Alice Levine is a founding member of a small but powerful group in the Valley called Jewish Activists for Immigration Justice, JAIJ, Western Mass. Shortly after moving to Western Mass in 2017, Alice worked with others to plan a large, quote, Jews Stand with the Dreamers, unquote, rally in the winter of 2018. At the same time, she became involved with the Pioneer Valley Workers Center and became a regular support person for the family of Lucio Perez, who was in sanctuary at the United Church of Christ Church in Amherst for almost 4 years. And many of you, but not all of you, know that this congregation was a sanctuary for Rita Katanarova from Russia, who lived in our church basement for 2.5 years and was supported 24/7 for 2.5 years. And I'm glad to say that hopefully her long challenges with deportation will be coming to fruition, and I wish her well with her citizenship process this year.
Hello, I'm so glad to be with all of you today. Thank you, Joanna, for inviting me. I just should say that if I say JAIJ, that's J-A-I-J, we call it JAIJ, so that's the Jewish Activists for Immigration Justice, and we think of ourselves sort of as an affinity group that does activism together. I also should say the caveat in response to what Joanna said, that I'm not going to give you a lot of personal stories of people I met, but I'm glad to do that after the service. There are so many sort of issues that I want to raise with you. So first of all, I looked at the UU principles on your website and thought I would mention 3 that I'm going to try to build on and maybe we can keep in mind. One is the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Another is the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. And third, the respect for the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are a part. So Joanna had mentioned that I've taken several trips, and one of the first ones I took was actually to Honduras with Witness for Peace, which is a wonderful group going since the 80s to help people in North America understand the policies of our government and what impact they've had in Latin America and the Caribbean. So I'll just mention one thing that I learned from them. I came home with the understanding that the voyage, which at that point people mostly jumped on a train called La Bestia, the beast, that women begged their priests to give them birth control before they left because the likelihood of rape was so great, and that was something that really stuck with me. I went to Arizona with School of the Americas Watch twice, and then as Joanna mentioned, I went to Homestead Child Detention Center in Florida with JAIJ, where we stood on ladders outside a barbed wire fence where once a day the children, or at least the boys, we never saw the girls, came out to play soccer, and we had large hearts and we waved to them, and some of them waved back and then got in trouble, but to let them know that there were people in our country who loved them and saw them. In addition, we went to Brownsville, Matamoros, Brownsville in Texas, Matamoros in Mexico, spent time with the people in the tent camps there, some of whom we later learned had to make the torturous decision when Border Patrol would not let even sick children across, to send their children across alone, because once Biden was president, he accepted children coming alone, but not families, for the most part. So there are a few things I want to mention about the context of talking about immigration justice. One, as most of you probably know, there's a great global increase in the number of people forcibly displaced from their homes by political and social oppression, including war, persecution, domestic and gang violence, climate crisis, which leads to both poverty and starvation to an extent that wasn't even true prior to that, when people were already poor. And mostly this is people in the global south trying to escape to the global north. The second thing I want to mention is that a lot of people don't know or don't necessarily pay attention to, and I really tried to pick things out knowing that this was probably a liberal progressive crowd. I tried to pick out things that I didn't think were so obvious that some of us might fall for or believe from what we hear. And so another thing is that when they talk about people doing things illegally, those who are coming here applying for or petitioning for asylum are actually doing something that is absolutely supported by both US and international law. People have the right to say, I am in fear of my life due to the persecution and violence in my country, and I need asylum here, no matter where they cross and how they cross. Third, a lot of people don't know the difference between a refugee, which many congregations support particular refugees with circles of care, and asylum seekers. And I want to tell you that because JAGE has chosen to focus our energies on asylum seekers who get less support from all kinds of sources. So refugees, as you may know, are people usually living in refugee camps across the ocean from us who have been living there for years and get some help from the UN that runs most of these refugee camps to apply for refugee status in the countries that either they would like to go to or that choose to accept them. And those folks get refugee status before they get here, so they are never illegal. They come here, they are met by Jewish Family Services or Catholic Charities at the airplane usually, and there's a plan to temporarily house them, and they get working papers usually quickly, and life is tough and they've gone through incredible trauma, but they don't continue, at least at this point, to live constantly with the fear of deportation. Another thing that I hadn't thought of, but I learned when I went to the Child Detention Center, is that, as people might guess, the deportation, surveillance, detention system is a moneymaker for many profit-making companies. The place we visited that held children behind barbed wire was Geo Group, and they are a profit-making company. The same is true for companies that produce all the border surveillance equipment, companies that collect and control for ICE, and each of these companies has a large lobbying component, puts a lot of money into lobbying, and so it really affects our laws, the executive orders, and all of that. The next thing is that there are alternatives to our focus on keeping people out and proving that we are tough on the border, which I think Biden has fallen for. A number of groups have developed well-thought-out proposals for how this could work, including national coordination so that somebody knows what cities, what states are able to take more people, funding for shelters and nonprofits, providing housing, legal aid, etc., and establishment and funding of well-staffed and well-resourced welcome centers at the border. And finally, I just wanted to say, since we are a group not of immigrants, We follow the lead largely of two strong immigrant-led national groups, which I encourage you to learn more about from the little quarter sheet that Joanna prepared. One is Welcome with Dignity, and the other is Detention Watch Network. I strongly encourage you to look up these groups, learn about them, donate, sign up to get their newsletters, and even consider joining or signing the pledge of Welcome with Dignity, either as individuals or as a congregation. So now I want to move on to parts of the mainstream narrative that I feel like liberal and progressive people may be convinced by or may have questions about. So basically, there are four aspects of the mainstream narrative that I think we need to think more about. One is that our border is terribly insecure. Second, that letting people in en masse may be dangerous. Third, there are just too many people coming into the US for us to take care of. There's not enough shelter, education, and other services. And finally, immigrants may take jobs away from other, particularly low-income people. So here are some of my responses. In fact, we spend so much money on militarization of the border, surveillance both at the border and in the interior of the US, detention, deportation, and more. This money could be spent helping people establish lives here, find housing, start working, etc. To give you a little more detail, the US has in recent years spent more money on immigration enforcement than at any other point in history. For fiscal year 2024, the administration requested $25 billion for U.S. Customs and Border Protection, which is CBP, and U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, usually called ICE, which was an increase of almost $800 million over the previous year. So it's not that the money isn't there, it's that the money is not being used to welcome people with dignity. Second, in terms of people taking jobs from others, as you know, almost every industry, especially now since COVID, seems to be greatly in need of workers. I see signs about starting bonuses at Dunkin' Donuts and McDonald's and service stations and manufacturers. We don't have enough doctors or other healthcare providers, and immigrants and asylum seekers, from my experience, are extremely eager to work in either the fields they're trained in or hopefully temporarily in other jobs. Unfortunately for asylum seekers, it takes an extremely long time. I believe the current regulations are that the soonest you can get working papers is 6 months after you arrive. So, for example, Haitian asylum seekers who have made their way to Springfield or this area, Greenfield, they usually are just waiting and waiting and waiting for working papers, and they want to work. And the government is stopping them from doing that and then saying these immigrants may take your jobs. Another part of the myth is that our ancestors came in legally as immigrants, so why can't they come legally? And this is something I've learned a lot about. Many groups have had to enter the US without documents when their situations were desperate and there were no legal options. One of the first things that our group that became JAGE did was to bring a professor here who had written a book after they closed the gates, Illegal Jewish Immigration to the US, 1926 to 1963. And those dates are not accidental. 1926 is when what was previously a fairly open system of immigration, except for the Chinese Exclusion Act. In 1926, that all changed when the US government set up racist quotas that allowed Northern Europeans to come in and set many more limits on people from other places. Also, I wanted to mention, when we're talking about legal and undocumented immigrants, I think many of us thought most of them were Spanish speakers from Latin America, but I've recently learned that about 17% of those currently undocumented in the US are Asian or Pacific Islanders. And right here in the Valley, as I've mentioned, there are asylum seekers living in hotels from Haiti, and although relatively small in numbers so far, an increasing number of African and other Black undocumented immigrants are often invisible when we talk about immigration, but at the same time are treated more harshly by the government and those running and staffing the for-profit centers. So to say a little more about race and racism and the role that plays, I just found out, and I haven't read it yet, there's a book that was written in 2014 by May Ngai, N-G-A-I, called Impossible Subjects. And a CBS host was interviewing her and said, oh, his father had come from Italy in a situation not unlike the border stories heard today. He arrived alone and really was, as they say today, an unaccompanied minor. His story ends up being what a lot of people would call a classic American story. So the CBS commentator says, but it makes me think, what are the important differences between him in the early 20th century and that same 15-year-old on the border today? And Nye answers, the color of his skin. Nye continues, in fact, when those more favored European immigrants entered the country illegally, exceeding or avoiding the quotas entirely, they were often forgiven. Between 1925 and 1965, at least 200,000 undocumented Europeans were given a path to citizenship, according to Nye's research. So blaming immigrants, blacks, and Jews for a country's or individual's problems has a long history. I'm sure you all heard in Charlottesville or saw the signs that said Jews will not replace us. This racist and anti-Semitic conspiracy is part of the Great Replacement theory, which stokes fear among white people, or white Christian people, that the country is or will be taken over by people of color, and that somehow Jews are making that happen. There were rumors or whatever that Jews were funding the caravans that were coming from Central America. And today, we might wonder why when they say, oh, we just can't process people that quickly, but the Ukrainian refugees were treated very differently than asylum seekers of color. And they were processed very quickly, and most Ukrainians and Afghans got their work authorizations right away, although having read yet last night more of Project 2025, I don't think those folks are really safe either. Another issue that really came up in the when Trump was president was the in-your-face, disgusting family separation, where we saw on the TV children being torn away from the arms of their parents. And certainly there's not as much vitriol and in-your-face hatred now, but family separation is still happening, largely through deportation and detention. I brought a book with me. This is the young adult version of a memoir by Diane Guerrero, who some of you may know as an actor in Orange is the New Black. And she wrote a book. The one for adults is called In the Country We Love. The one for kids, My Family Divided, One Girl's Journey of Home Loss and Hope. This book particularly spoke to me because I lived in Boston for most of my adult life and worked in the Boston Public Schools. And she was a high school student at Boston Arts Academy, where she learned her acting skills or perfected them. And while she was in high school, both of her parents were deported, and her life changed. And of course, many children now, and particularly under Trump and another possible Trump presidency, will go to school in the morning with fears that when they come home that night, their parents won't be there. And families have had to make arrangements for what will happen. Because there's a huge number of children, now I'm skipping ahead, there's a huge number of children, an estimated 5.5 million as of January of this year, who are citizens of the United States, but who live in mixed status families, which means one or more people in their household, often their parents, are undocumented. So citizen children are not safe from family separation. And that's about 8% of US citizen children. So almost 1 in 10 children in the United States lives with that kind of fear. What Biden promised in his first campaign about immigration versus what he's actually done, or I believe yielded to with the dominant narrative. Currently, he's put in place an asylum ban when numbers get to a certain point, and this is being challenged in court by ACLU and other organizations. In the meantime, many humanitarian abuses have been reported by the organizations on the border. Here's one. One man who entered the U.S. with his partner and 11-month-old son and surrendered to Border Patrol to request protection or asylum, told advocates that he explained to the immigration officer that he had been kidnapped and tortured by organized crime and showed them the marks on his body, but the agents told him, "There is no asylum anymore. We don't care." Biden and probably Harris have been trying to play both sides, to be tough on the border, but take some just actions to appease the left. So recently, thank goodness, they've extended TPS status for Haitians, but as of May of this year, they'd already deported Haitians, that recently. And they, as Joanna referred to, although I don't know Arita's specific situation, Biden agreed to not deport and give a process to at least some undocumented spouses and children of U.S. citizens to apply for lawful permanent residency without leaving the country. I believe that change, like the two examples I gave above, the TPS and the pathways for undocumented spouses, came from advocacy and many, many people and organizations being vocal and visible about what was demanded. I don't know if you all heard about this, but a great example of this is when groups like the Haitian Bridge Alliance and UndocuBlack brought a case against the Biden administration to the United Nations Committee Against Racial Discrimination, which I believe was pretty embarrassing and shameful for the Biden administration that likes to position itself as working against racism. So I think that's why some changes have happened. Of course, there's a huge difference between Biden and Trump on immigration. Everyone should read the scary promises of Project 2025, which include nationwide this is not in Project 2025. Donald Trump's most concrete plans for a second term is some kind of nationwide deportation initiative to remove 15 million to 20 million immigrants via the use of military force. And I should say that the estimate is that there are 11 million undocumented immigrants. So they're clearly, if they're going after 15 or 20 million, they're not going to be very careful about who they're targeting. At the Republican National Convention, you may have seen signs that said mass deportation now, and heard people chanting, "Send them back, send them back." Now I conclude, no matter who wins the election, we need to keep our eyes on the policies and practices of our government and of state governments like Texas in terms of how they treat those fleeing violence or unlivable conditions. Under Trump, we may need to be in the streets defending our neighbors locally who he wants to deport en masse, and we ourselves might be under threat as activists. Under a Democrat, we need to watch out for policies that are not put in place with as much hatred and therefore are not always as visible to us, but which still may send adults and children back to violence, persecution, and death, and separate children from their parents and families. Between now and the election, we need to do everything possible to educate ourselves and our communities and to pressure the Democrats to build justice for immigrants and asylum seekers into their platforms, plans, and actions, and then to act on those once they get into power. We need to make sure we're all talking about justice for immigrants and asylum seekers and not leaving in place a narrative that's dominated by fear, hatred, and racism. Thank you.
Oh, and we will now see a video and hear Yo-Yo Ma speak about his life as an immigrant. This is from Dvorak's New World Symphony.
Hello, I'm Yo-Yo Ma, and I'd like to say it is an honor for me to participate in the New American Arts Festival. As a New American, as an immigrant, I feel I'm always and constantly participating in the American experiment. And I'd like to offer you a piece of music that when I think of it, even though it comes from a single source, it actually includes the seeds of inclusivity and diversity. Let me tell you why. When Dvorak came to America in the 1890s, he taught at a music school. And he told his students, do not compose like me. Do not be like me. Instead, listen. Listen to all the sounds around you. Listen to the sounds and the musics of the peoples all around you, of Native Americans, of African Americans, of other immigrant groups. And from that moment on, if you do this all the time, you will find your voice. So guess what happened? Dvorak's students listened to him, and they practiced what he said. They listened, and they made their students listen also. And guess what? His students, their students, became Duke Ellington, Aaron Copland, George Gershwin. Diverse, original, individual voices from one single source through active listening. And this is what I think the New American Arts Festival is all about. And here is Coming Home.
We have two more readings to conclude our service, and then a postlude, And then we'll have refreshments. Today is a day where we will have lemonade and iced tea and cookies and conversation. So I hope you'll stay. I hope you'll stay for at least a few minutes. Come and go as you wish. Martín Espada is a poet and author, and he's authored, I think, nearly a dozen books now. If you're not familiar with his writings, I hope you will take the time to look him up in your local library. I chose a reading called Imagine the Angels of Bread. And this is from his book, Alabanza. Alabanza. Imagine the angels of bread. This is the year that squatters evict landlords. Gazing like admirals from the rail of the roof deck or levitating hands in praise of steam in the shower. This is the year that shawled refugees deport judges who stare at the floor and their swollen feet as files are stamped with their destination. This is the year that police revolvers, stove hot, blister the fingers of raging cops, and nightsticks splinter in their palms. This is the year that dark-skinned men, lynched a century ago, return to sip coffee quietly with the apologizing descendants of their executioners. This is the year that those who swim the border's undertow and shiver in boxcars are greeted with trumpets and drums at the first railroad crossing. And then I located a piece of prose by Martín Espada, and it was about the life and the works of Walt Whitman. And I must admit, I knew very little about Walt Whitman. So I read this wonderful article. It was written during the presidency of Donald Trump. And I'm going to tell you, the title is Filthy Presidentiad, Walt Whitman in the Age of Trump. Martín Espada says, John Marsh, in his book, In Walt We Trust, How a Queer Socialist Poet Can Save America from Itself, has this to say about the poet Walt Whitman and democracy. For Whitman, democracy is a way of being. In particular, it is a way of being with others. It has much more to do with how you approach your fellow men and women. Do you respect them? Do you acknowledge their dignity? Do you identify your interests with theirs? In short, do you love them? Walt Whitman wrote this as a reaction to what he saw as increasing restriction of immigration. America must welcome all, Chinese, Irish, German, pauper or not, criminal or not, all, without exceptions, become an asylum for all who choose to come. We may have drifted from this principle temporarily, but time will bring us back. America is not for special types, but for the great mass of people, the vast, surging, hopeful army of workers. Dare we deny them a home, close the doors in their face, take possession of all, and fence it in, and then sit down satisfied with our system, convinced that we have solved our problem? I, for my part, refuse to connect America with such a failure, such a tragedy, for tragedy it would be. And now we'll close our service in silence to listen to the postlude by Ruth Chantal.